Hello and welcome back to awtoolbox.com. My name's Glenn Keller, and in this video, we are diving into Deployment Center. Now that we've got a couple of the prereqs, so just kind of recap real quick. If you are starting here, we have installed Java. We've got browsers to help support us. We've got editors to help us modify files. We've got, let's go in, we've got an Oracle database installed, plus a listener. At this point, we also have a license server and a valid modified license. All right, so we've got all of this stuff installed, set up, configured. I think that we're ready to get Deployment Center installed. So number 6 is going to be DC, or Deployment Center. And this is going to require that Java installation. So Java is going to come into play with starting up Deployment Center. It is required to be used by it. We're also going to need those editors as we get into this install. So the cool thing is Deployment Center, if you haven't used it yet, it's really just a web-based installation tool for Teamcenter. For you that have installed Teamcenter over the years, it's kind of a direct replacement tool to the TEM. Let's go ahead and unpackage it. I'm going to go in now. We've talked about in previous videos where to go get the media from. We've provided links kind of where you would want to go, discern between whether or not it was Linux or Windows, and gathered our media into this machine. And now I've created a media directory. Again, this could be a drive, something mapped to the machine, but if I come into this software, I've got this 2506 package and the 2503 package. Now just note, we've also talked about the additional applications folders that I've got here for TC Journal Workbench, the document reference architecture that Siemens provides, as well as the test data, which is provided by Sherpa Design. It's an assembly, and that assembly is going to help us test things out like indexing and visualization. So the software folder, though, is where you would want to go find Deployment Center. As of the 22312 package, I believe it was, could be wrong on that one. Siemens has now packaged Active Workspace, microservices, and Teamcenter into one package. For the last few years, it's been 3 different packages, and you had to play kind of a shuffleboard to see which ones matched up with which. But finally, they have put it into one zip. So any subsequent patches you'll have to add in, but it's fairly easy to do so inside of Deployment Center. To start with, we're just doing the latest patch that was available when we built this image. There is a new patch out, I think it's 04, which we will go through a patching video to kind of update with later. So if you are running Deployment Center, just note, Deployment Center is in these packages underneath the build. And if you were to come in here and kind of look around, it's inside of the install folder. So if you are installing a patch of 2506 or a patch of 2412 or a patch of 2312 with Deployment Center, you must patch your existing Deployment Center installation first, and just like we used to patch the TEM for those of you that have been working for a little bit. You have to patch Deployment Center first so that it knows about the ability to deploy a later version. Otherwise, you could get software that doesn't show up. So when you're installing fresh, you need to install from that latest patch. So in here, since I'm going to be running 2506, I'm going to use this Deployment Center. If you weren't using this patch and you were just installing the base, this one has its version of Deployment Center as well. So this one is right here. So this came with 2506. They had made some corrections or some changes to things for the 003 patch, and that's why we're using it out of there. So one thing I did note is my software is nested. I can see there's two 2506 WinTX64 folders. So I'm just going to cut this and cut the one below it and paste it at this level so it merges in. I like to have a nice clean software directory or repository here. Any patches will have the operating system folder inside of them as well. So Deployment Center can be found inside of that 250603 install folder, Deployment Center. I've got it here. So this is kind of the installation of Deployment Center, if you will. You get to pick where the server is installed, but kind of like with Oracle, I like to go get or create a nice directory for this. To each his own. I extract it here, always leaving the original zip there in case I need a fallback to go rebuild Deployment Center. And then once it's extracted, I go put it into the location that I want it to go. Just note that there will be several layered deployment_center folders. So you may not want to do 3 deployment_center folders during this installation. And I'll show you kind of what I mean by that. All right, so this is extracted, and you can see this is essentially Deployment Center, like the media and the tools to build that out. So what I usually do is I'll take this, and again, to each his own, or her own. If I go into apps, I'll go into the Siemens folder, and typically I'll just paste it here, and then I'll give it the format that I like, which is Deployment Center. Now, some of you may just want center, so maybe we'll just do that. So if I have Teamcenter, it'll be here. Deployment Center will be here. TC Journal Workbench will be here. If I install the help, it'll be here. So it's a nice little organization thing. So Deployment Center, and then this is the media of Deployment Center. The tool itself is inside of here, Deployment Center subfolder. That's why I renamed the top folder so it doesn't have a duplicate. And then if you come down, there are the different configuration files and utilities needed in working with this tool. So if you were going to upgrade Deployment Center, there's an upgrade configuration file that you need to fill out, and then you execute, and it'll upgrade the existing one to the new one. It's fairly easy. We do have and will do the patching of our system up to 04 or 05, depending on when this is completed. So if you're unsure how to do that, just bear with us. We'll get that done. All right, so in here, you've got all these different ones. When you're first starting out, you need this install config file. I always make a copy of it, so I'm just going to say copy, paste in the same directory. Some people like to rename it. The dash copy usually tells me, but I'll go ahead and say dash orig on here, just so I know I have a fallback copy. I'm going to edit this file now. And remember, you do have a backup in the zip already, so you don't really need to do that. But this file is basically a control file to tell it what to do when you run the utility. The utility could just be put in and have all of this information just in line in the utility. This is just kind of an input file for the deployment. So you can pick the different features. Typically, I'll do no to the product excellence program settings. So this is just if you want Siemens to be able to collect metrics on what you install and use and do. So in some environments, it's actually not allowed, but you can make that judgment. I'll put no on mine. The Deployment Center server settings. So in here, basically, I need to come in and define where I want Deployment Center to be installed. I have already created this directory, and just note the slashes. So it's C apps Siemens Deployment Center, and notice it's going to call the server where Deployment Center is running from the web server. So that is in my build. If I pull this down, you can see Deployment Center would be here. So web server would get put right here with this data, and that's why I copied this here. So in here, I like that directory. I'm going to keep that. and then what port is it going to run on. Now, the only collision I see here for my system is the default port for JBoss is 8080, so this is going to collide with JBoss at that point. I don't really care. I can update JBoss later. First one to be installed wins. So in here, the one thing I would consider, if you're in a bigger site or system, there are approved ports to use between servers. So definitely consult with the individuals when you're picking the ports, if you're not that individual. The service names, you're going to have a few services relating to Deployment Center. So I like to add a Teamcenter underscore to the front of the service name. And the reason I do that is because I want all my services for Teamcenter to be grouped together in the services window. You don't have to do this. It's just a really nice mechanism to keep them grouped. I also like to add Teamcenter to the service name here, just so that they match. So which one I want to see, and then what the actual name is. This will help me if I have to delete the service. There's no space, so I don't need the quotes. All right, so typically I'll just update those. If I come back down, notice that one path, the CApp Siemens. This is the repository. So this will be ultimately where I have most of my files that get generated from Deployment Center. There is a media location in there as well as where we put ours, so you can kind of have a default place to put your media and other things. So I like to put this inside of the same location I install everything else. I'm going to do apps, Siemens, Deployment Center, and then it's repository by default. 8090 is the port they're going to use on this one. I do know there's a port going to be used for 8090 later on in the install, so I just want to take priority or listing down our ports so that I know what I can use and what I can't. Now in here, I'm installing this first, so the port is open. I'm going to use it. Repo service name, I'm going to do exactly what I did before. Teamcenter underscore DC repo service, and then add Teamcenter Deployment Center repository service for the names. Notice that if you're running Linux, this is only applicable if you're in Windows. So obviously in Linux you don't have the services like this, so you can comment that out at that point if it says Windows only. It's actually just ignored, so you don't even have to comment it out. So the repo publisher port is 8081 by default, and then 6161 for the repository publisher. These are things that are going to allow you to pick up on software changes in your media directory, be able to put and schedule the build of deploy packages, that kind of thing. So the default user is DC admin. You can change this, and yeah, you can use an encrypt utility like you see here, and specify a password file if you would like. So if you don't want to have just ASCII text sitting in here for the password, you can do that. So we might do that in a little bit when we secure the system, but password equals DC admin in this case works just fine for me. So if you use this one, comment out this one with that same hashtag or pound symbol. And then I like this password, so that's the one I'm going to use in this case. All right, so now we get into some extra options. The extra software directory. So I pretty much always end up doing this. I will uncomment this and I will point it to where my media is in the system, because I want to keep my media where I want and have designed my media to be and accessible to the servers I need it to be accessible from. So my media is in the software folder. So this is what I want. I'm going to put it in here. And notice I could specify another one. And this just keeps me from having to copy my media around to multiple locations. Now notice that the way that you specify a slash in this environment or in this config file is double backslash. So I'm going to be consistent with that. I'm just going to update this. You could use the find and replace tool if you want to be fast about it. And hopefully once that gets installed, it'll just automatically pick up on the software that's added to that location. And if you did want to use the out-of-the-box one, it'll do from both. So in here, notice the repository service OS user. You don't have to specify this. It'll pick up on who you are as the installing user at the moment, but you can uncomment it and specify a specific user if it's somebody other than the one that you need. So in this case, you would want to uncomment line 88, the password for the repo service, and then down below there would be another set of those for each of the service types. So we'll get down to those. In our case, we're just going to leave them. I'm logged in as my Teamcenter installing user or my Deployment Center installing user, so I'm good to go. I'm going to scroll down, and then there are options for password settings for encryption, so you can use an encrypted password. So obviously, if you're pointing to an encrypted password file, you can set that up. There is an OS user and password for another set of services. This is for generating the script, and then you have, whenever you get done building an environment, or you always have to generate some scripts, whether it's a mass client deploy, a server deploy, it doesn't really matter. The scripts directories can be set up to deploy the scripts to multiple locations. By default, it's going to install it right inside of the repository in the installation directory. So in our case, it'll end up being in apps, Siemens, Deployment Center, and then there'll be a repository folder with a deployment scripts folder in there. So that's what we're going to end up getting. Now, later down the road, we'll use what's called a maintenance flag with the Deployment Center utility, and we'll add a secondary place because you'll see as what my process is, I'll want to streamline that. So for now, we're just going to leave that be, but if you did want to update it, just update it like we did for the extra software directory, and you can specify which one you want. You can have up to 6 in that location. All right, so use HTTPS. If you're using HTTPS and you have your cert stores and certificates and everything, you can dive into this. We haven't quite made it to generating our certs in this installation yet, so I don't want to muddy the waters of this, but definitely circle back. We're going to be trying to get to SSL as well as single sign-on later in the course. If you want more information on that, we have provided a link in this course to that set of information, and the logs on this file definitely do provide a little bit more information about them if you're familiar. I'm going to skip over all of that, and you can see that there is a Vault service here. This is what it's going to run on, so just make sure that it's not going to collide with any ports that you're running on any other applications. And I like to add the Teamcenter to the front of the service. So Teamcenter, and then again, I'm not going to specify these. I'm going to let it pick up on the installing user. The only part of this that's just kind of vague at the moment, and that's the SSL setup. Bare minimum though, we are done. This install config props is all set. I'm going to hit save. Because of this 8080, I already have Wildfly installed on this box. So this is a consideration. If you have colliding ports in any way, shape, or form, you want to shut them off because this installation is going to install and start up these services, and then you'll get an error during the installation. In here, I've got it saved off. I'm going to close this, and then I can come out of here. And basically, you just simply run this Deployment Center tool. It is Deployment Center utility.bat. If you are working in Linux, you have a SHA file here. So it's really just which one are you going to execute. You don't need anything other than Java Home and JRE Home set prior to executing the tool. And as long as you have your prerequisites on the operating system, you should be good. So I'm going to copy this, and then I'm going to take it into, I'm just going to grab a command prompt. I know I said use Visual Studio Code, but sometimes it's nice teaching-wise to break it out a little bit. So I'm going to say run as administrator, and then I'm going to cd to that directory. So just note this little /D, it just means that if that directory happens to not be the same directory as the command prompt is currently in, automatically switch to that new directory. So I'm going to say enter. It was the same directory either way. And then I'm going to say deployment center. And one cool thing with all Teamcenter Siemens related utilities, if you just do -H, typically you'll get a nice help for that. I will write this out just to have it. There's a ton of different things you can do with this utility, by the way. So everything from running maintenance mode to updating different things like removing scripts, adding scripts directories, changing the password, adding software directories, different passwords, enabling or disabling that software analytics. All of it can be done using this tool, but so can the initial installation. So up at the top, if you're going to install it fresh, you're going to give it the install config we just modified. And the secondary one is the upgrade one. So if you are just doing a patch up to 0.03 or 0.04, then you would run this one from the 0.03 or 0.04 patch and then upgrade that deployment center. So in here, this is essentially what I want to run, almost verbatim. I'm going to copy that. And then I'm going to paste it here and hit go. So again, all of my credentials and everything should have already been specified inside of that installation directory or in that config file. So I'm just really telling it to install Deployment Center. Let's go ahead and pause while this deploys. All right, so the installation has completed. That only took roughly 5 minutes or so on this server to install, and you can see that it has given me a nice pointer to use in the browser to get to Deployment Center. It's also told me a couple of things about what the names of the services were that were started, if they were able to be started, and then it tells me that there's an additional tools directory that won't be available in future Deployment Center kits. So if you're interested in the deployment process, it essentially creates each of the components, but definitely pay attention to the order. It'll help you troubleshoot the deployment in future goes. So that's all you needed to get Deployment Center up and running. It is a standalone tool, but it does reach out and talk to other servers to obtain the status of those servers. So in this case, I'm going to go ahead and exit this tool for the moment. And I'm just going to see what it gave me. So in here, I can see there's a web server folder now. And in that web server folder, I really don't have too much. But if I go up to the installation directory, that's where I had pointed the web server and repository to be. So in the web server, you can see that this is essentially the meat and potatoes of what Deployment Center is. And then the repository are the generated files, like the deploy scripts directory by default. The software, this is the other media location that you could put. And then you can see it's got some additional DC contribution files and a system folder here with the deployer mechanism. There's a README that you should definitely take a look at. If you open it up, it talks about what the description of each one of those is. So in here, if I come out of repository, that's basically what it gave me. Now, if you go to the services, you can see that if I come in, I've got the Teamcenter Deployment Center repository service, the Deployment Center service, and the Vault service. So basically, you need to have the Vault running at all times. The Deployment Center service is responsible for the interface, and the repository service is responsible for those kind of background processes, picking up on software, changes to the repository itself. If I close this, I can then go into Deployment Center. So I'm just going to open up a browser. And then in the browser window, I'll just go ahead and go to this server, which is training 01. 8080 was the default port, and then Deployment Center, I believe, is the URL. So now that I've got this here, I like to just kind of take this off and then favorite or bookmark it. So I'll come in here and I'll create a new bookmark. So now I've got it. I'm going to call it that, and I've got it in the toolbar so I don't forget it. So in here, I can log in now, DC admin. That's the password I used inside of the config file when we created it. Again, you can use an encrypted file for the password instead of typing it in. And then this is generically what you get with Deployment Center. So you only really need one Deployment Center installation per an environment. It has a little getting started, but there isn't too much in here. Just kind of point you to the online site and information. Though the online help documentation is great for this tool. Environments, this is where you're going to actually either send your existing environment into the system and resolve any inconsistencies so that you can then manage it and deploy it with Deployment Center going forward. Or this is where we're going to actually create our environment. The software repositories is going to show us our media and what is available, and you can see that even though the out-of-the-box media location for Deployment Center, which is inside of the Siemens Deployment Center repository software folder, this doesn't have anything in it. But that extra software location that I provided during the installation then came in and found the media from that other location. So I can tell that that worked with the software location. And then a couple of cool things about this is Deployment Center will actually tell you what version, what product, what software, what version, the dependency. So this one is dependent on 2506, tells you have to have that first. This is a service pack or patch, whereas this one is the main installation. What operating system this media is good for, as well as the actual file name and the last date it was modified or updated. So this is really cool. In the past, you had to kind of focus on where it was in the operating system and kind of compare it. You had to kind of know what a dependency was between the versions. You can also take media that is no longer used and you can obsolete it. So you can make media obsolete. And then you can get an overview of how much storage or space that you have if you're going to be adding in additional media. So I think this is a really cool little page. Gives you everything, kind of a repository of all your media. And then you can selectively pick what software you want to use when you build your environments. The machines here will be machines that this Deployment Center is installed on or machines that you've configured in your environment. As long as it can reach out to them, it can kind of source the information. So we'll take a look at that as we go forward.